Hey, everybody. Happy Sunday. I guess that still applies. Just a note, this is going to be the first time I do one of these bourbon talks where I'm recording the audio, and I'm going to put it up on my Substack for anybody who wants it in a podcast form. That's jaredyatessexton.substack.com. I've had a couple of people ask for that for a while, and luckily we have the sound of my neighbors running around in their car with the brakes not working, which is great. Not a bad metaphor, honestly. Cheers, everyone. You know, a lot of you have been on this ride with me for a while, been coming to these for a while, been talking about this stuff for a while. And we have talked a lot about what the current moment was and what it could be. We've known that there was a lot of danger. We've known that there were a lot of opportunities for bad things to happen. There's a lot of danger right now, and you don't need me to tell you that. Probably like you, I've spent the past few days watching the events come out of Ukraine and listening to Vladimir Putin lie to the world and try his damnedest to cover up his aggression and legitimize it through conspiracy theories and just outright lies. I've watched absolute cruelty play out. I've talked to people who are in Ukraine, people who have family in Ukraine, and it is one of the most heartbreaking things that I have ever seen in my life. I'm sure it is for you as well. Before we move forward, here's to the people of Ukraine. Cheers. Russians invading their country can go to hell. We have so much to talk about tonight. We have a lot to get into. We have a lot of questions. We have a lot of concerns, because of course we do. But I wanted to take a second before we get into this to talk very quickly about where this came from, why we're in the place that we are, and what we're looking at going forward. There's some people here tonight, and probably some people who are going to listen to this who maybe haven't heard me go into depths on this, but I want to have a quick reset. What has happened here is that Vladimir Putin, a murderous dictator who has ruled Russia with an iron fist for decades now, was allowed to become an integral part of the world system. The Western powers were happy to have an authoritarian who could make post-Soviet Russia, quote unquote, work. You know, they were very happy to criticize him, to pose and say how they thought that he was a murderous thug. Meanwhile, they vacationed with him at all of these meetings. They shook his hand, did a bunch of photo ops with him, and accepted his money. Vladimir Putin and the oligarchical interest in Russia, their money is everywhere. And that is one of the larger problems in all of this that nobody wants to touch on, which is that the money which has been stolen from the Russian people, the money that has been made in oppressing the Russian people, that has been stolen by Putin and his oligarchs and used to fund their lavish lifestyles. And Western civilization and the Western powers have welcomed that money. Right now, that money is just absolutely pumping through the body proper, including in the United States and places like New York, Washington, D.C., and within the Republican Party and in right-wing groups such as the NRA and God knows how many others that don't even have to report where their donations come from. On top of that, God knows how much of that Russian money that has been pilfered from the Russian people is currently running through cryptocurrencies. We have no idea. That money has propped up real estate throughout America, throughout Great Britain. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And on top of that, Russia has used the reliance on fossil fuels to build themselves a steady little place in the middle of the world empire. So as Putin has done this, the Western powers have stood by and basically allowed corruption and authoritarianism to grow like a poison within the system, pretending like all of this would be fine or simply not caring if it wasn't. And we have reached this point where Vladimir Putin not only had enough power and enough money that he felt like that he could finally strike out against the system. And for people who don't know this already, Vladimir Putin, first and foremost, is an absolute gangster and crook, a criminal. But he has also been surrounded by people who have completely given him an infrastructure to surround those crimes with a semblance of ideology. These are people like Alexander Dugin, people who have told him that he is a historical figure, that he is almost a modern day czar, that someday would strike out against neoliberal globalism and bring the West and America to its knees. In order to do this, people like Dugin have given him a roadmap. And it's been around for forever. Dugin's book, The Foundation of Geopolitics, was published in 1997. That's 25 years ago for anyone keeping track. The entire idea behind this was that Russia would destabilize the world global neoliberal order. They'd go into Britain, and they'd make sure that Britain would basically be self-amputate itself away from the European Union so that they could move apart. Another part of the plan was to go into the United States of America and pit us against each other, which they absolutely were successful in doing. The next step was to annex Ukraine, take over Ukraine and bring it back within the former Soviet Empire and the Russian Empire. This is both Soviet and the Tsardom of Russia. It's all of these things together because the ideology is almost completely incoherent. But that's what's happened. It's not that Vladimir Putin has lost his mind. He more or less has bought into this bullshit ideology, but that's not a matter of him just losing it. This has been an ongoing problem. And absolutely, the American right wing has played into this. There's an international right wing authoritarian movement. And in a lot of ways, we watched that come to fruition with MAGA here in the United States of America. And it has now evolved. And it has become its own idea. And it has infected the body politic. What we're watching right now are the consequences of allowing that poison to course through our system and pretending like it didn't exist. It does exist. It absolutely does exist. And it is now reared its head. The past couple of days, as Putin has invaded Ukraine, we've watched the Ukrainians fight bravely. And the plans, which more or less called for a quick strike that would take over Ukraine quickly and with a minimal amount of casualties and difficulty, we have watched that plan thwarted. That's something to celebrate. And it has given an opportunity for the Western powers to try and catch up. And it has allowed this situation, which is fluid, to shift. And we'll talk more about that. We'll talk a little bit about what that means, what it's led to, and the opportunities that it opens up. But the original idea was that he would be able to do this. It would only last for a few days. He would replace the government of Ukraine with his own puppet regime. And then the Western world, based on its capitalistic interest, would just sort of shrug its shoulders and allow it to go on. There was a real possibility that that was going to happen. There's still a possibility that that could happen. Unfortunately, and I hate to tell you that because I wish it wasn't so, but there is a possibility that eventually he will overrun Ukraine, install his own puppet regime, and that the Western capitalist powers will allow it to happen and look the other way, and pretty much welcome him back into the G8 and all these other structures after a little bit of time, enough time to let it sort of seem like they really held it against him. There are a lot of other things that are taking place here, and we have a lot of questions about these. But I'm going to go ahead and start with the big question that I'm sure a lot of you are here to talk about, and this is from Louisville. Are we on the precipice of World War III? That is, of course, like a lot of the questions we're going to talk about tonight, incredibly complicated. I wish that I had a better answer than this, but the answer is maybe. I sincerely hope not. Because, as I have talked about on here, as I've talked about on the podcast before, there is a really bad situation that has reared its head, and it has gained steam and momentum over the past few years. And as American empire has merged into this neoliberal push, there has become a very, very strong authoritarian streak, a transnational authoritarian streak that has coordinated. It shared resources. It shared information. It communicates. It is constantly coordinating with one another. If this comes to bear, and I have to tell you, the Belarus is trying to get involved, just absolutely desperate to get involved, that will play a role, as will the possibility that other countries around Ukraine and near Russia might join NATO as a remedy to this current aggression. Those things could lead to escalations. It came out right before I got on here that the Western powers are going to send jets into Ukraine for Ukrainian use. For all we know, by the time this Bourbon talk is over, Vladimir Putin will have announced that to be Western aggression and could lead to more escalation. This is a really tense situation. And one of the problems that's occurring right now is that social media and cable news, the way that they are covering this war in Ukraine, it's a whipsaw effect. It goes back and forth. Of course, we have heroes in the Ukrainians, right? We have the Russian army, which has so far been thwarted. We have a villain in Vladimir Putin whose plans have been at least delayed. This is a really fluid, fragile situation. And as we're going to talk tonight, Vladimir Putin is in a corner. The entire idea behind this, as by the way, the rain picks up, it's been really, really warm here in Georgia, and there's a front come through. It's getting cold. I hope you're appreciating the rain because it makes a pretty apt background at this point. Vladimir Putin believed that he was going to be able to go into Ukraine and take it over within a couple of days. That would have limited the amount of attention on it, and considering Western powers and Western civilization and our attention spans, a couple of days of overthrowing Ukraine might have eventually just sort of evaporated. Right now, this is an ongoing story. It has captivated the attention of the world. Vladimir Putin believed that he could take care of this, flex his muscles, and take advantage of weakness in the West, which, by the way, there are things that he was actually taking advantage of. American hegemony is in trouble. The American empire is in trouble. And, by the way, the corruption that we just talked about in those fifth columns that he has sown all around the world, like, Those were things that he was taking advantage of and thought he would make use of, which does not mean that he still will not be able to. So are we on the precipice of World War III? Maybe. Possibly. We don't know where the other shoe is going to drop. One of the things that I've kept a very close eye on, and I've talked to a lot of people about, is whether or not China would eventually get involved in this. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. But if this transnational authoritarian movement, which is ideologically in line and probably financially in line with Vladimir Putin, if it decides to start making waves, and I think that we're going to see something from that in the next, a better idea of it in the next few days. See, Todd J says, do you have a sense of how isolated Putin is? He's pretty isolated. He has a strong power base in Russia, but he is pretty isolated in terms of the ideology that I've been talking about. So there is the question, is what happens to Vladimir Putin when his reality and his power base is challenged? It's not really an option for him to walk away from this. It's not an option for him to just simply admit defeat. To suffer an embarrassment like this on an international stage and on this level, empires fall from this type of a military loss. I do not see him going down without escalating. I do not see him going down without turning to some sort of a more vicious, more cruel type of escalation. And we'll talk about the options that are there, whether or not there's a possible coup. You know, there could come in the next couple of days, all of a sudden we could have a peace treaty and it's announced that Vladimir Putin has a health issue, right? Oh, he's decided to step down from his place of power and he's going to go to, I don't know, Belarus or Hungary, somewhere like that, go into exile. That could be a signal that there has been a power shift, a sea change. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But unfortunately, I wish I could tell you no, that we're not on the precipice of World War III. We are in incredible danger right now. And we've known for a while that this was a possibility. Hairball says, if Ukraine wins, which looks likely, will that snowball to the rest of the world? Specifically, will the GOP lose the wind in its sails and go down too? And two, if Putin can't win, what's to stop him from launching nukes? So, here's the good news in all of this. If this situation goes the right way, if Ukraine repels Russian attacks, if Ukraine wins this war and Putin has to either step down or admit some sort of defeat, which I have to tell you, I don't see him simply admitting defeat. It would have to probably be a stepping down, a moving away, or some sort of peace treaty, and then there's, I don't know, maybe a month or two that passes before they let him leave. If this turns out the right way, there is a possibility that dominoes could fall. The world order that was supposed to keep this from happening failed. And I don't care how many people are clogging up social media and the airwaves and writing these articles saying that the world order held. This isn't a success of the Western powers. This isn't a success of the neoliberal global order. Those things, and I cannot stress this enough, those things, these powers that are opposing Putin right now, this order that was supposed to stop all of this, if he simply would have breezed into Ukraine and taken it over, there's a very real possibility that they would have allowed it to happen. And they would have eventually welcomed him back into the fold. I truly, honestly believe that, and I want you to search your soul and find that that is true. If the Ukrainians win this, the Ukrainians won it. And the Russian people win it. Because we have to remember that it's the people involved. It's not the structures. It's not the nation states. But I have to tell you, going back to this question, I think that it is way too early to know how this is going to play out. It feels like this has been going on for forever. It feels like this has been a protracted battle so far. It's only been a couple of days. And I have to tell you that Vladimir Putin has not emptied every bullet from his gun. We need to be ready for some really gnarly stuff to come down the way. I know that we have celebrated Ukrainian grit and courage and strength. And I think that's exactly what we should be doing. But I'm telling you, there's a very real possibility that over the next few days or next few weeks, we don't know, that we are going to see some really disturbing things. And as that happens, this whole thing is going to kick up a few notches. If Putin has to turn and rely on weapons of war that are horrific, even to consider, if we're talking about not just airstrikes and shelling, but non-stop total warfare, if we start talking about chemical attacks, if we start talking about widespread massacring, siege even, this could get really ugly. And we could, absolutely, thermobaric weapons. That's a possibility. You have a wounded dictator in Vladimir Putin. And I want to remind everybody that Vladimir Putin not only has based his entire regime and power base on seeming invincible, but this is an incredibly insecure man. And that man who is being humiliated right now on the world stage, he will take his anger and his frustration and his humiliation out on those people. I firmly believe that. Now, the second part of the question is, if he realizes that he can't win, what's to stop him from launching nukes? The question there, when it comes to the nuclear option, is, will people go along with it? I don't think that he is ready to launch nuclear weapons. I think a lot of this and the timing of it has been a continual threat because mutually assured destruction has kept the Western powers out of this situation. Right? You know, a lot of people will talk about no-fly zones. A lot of people will talk about sending American troops into Ukraine. The entire point here is about keeping this from escalating into a world war and also involving nuclear weapons. I think that his continuing to mention it is not only a warning, it's to continually keep the Western powers thinking about it, but it's also a gesture before they start talking about any potential peace talks, which the next question, by the way, is from Monica. And Monica says that she's concerned about these peace talks and fearful that it's a trap. I feel like these peace talks are going to be entered into so that Putin can say, hey, I tried. You know, I went in here, I was dealing with a quote unquote threat. I reached out and I said, let's have peace talks. Again, so much of what he does is washing his hands and saying, hey, I tried. Here's the legitimization of what I'm doing. And I think that's what these peace talks are about. And I think mentioning nuclear weapons before these possible nuclear talks, or peace talks, that was a Freudian slip. Before having these peace talks, mentioning the nuclear arms and the possibility was about reminding Ukraine, we are a nuclear power. You are not. Do you want to risk the possibility that I might use them? It's a game. It's a game, and it always is. Now, the possibility that Putin, with his back against the wall, might possibly lead to some sort of a catastrophic situation that depends on whether or not he has the backing of both the oligarchs and the state structure. And the one thing that I think is important in all of this, and we'll talk more about this in just a moment with another question, what's important here is that Putin's actions seem insane to everybody else because they're not part of the larger ideological push that Putin has surrounded himself with. Oligarchs don't care about Dugin's foundations of geopolitics. They don't care about mythologies about Atlantis and Hyperboreans and the idea of Eurasianism. Those military leaders, they care about territory, they care about victories, they care about the prestige, they care about the money that is being funneled into their operations. The oligarchs don't care about that. Maybe a couple do. I don't know. Maybe a couple of them have been bought into this thing, but most of them don't. And I have to say, and this is really, really important, the oligarchs and the state structure have lived in terror of Vladimir Putin. He has made decisions for years about whether or not an oligarch can keep their wealth or keep their power. He turns on them constantly. It's one of the ways that he's maintained power. They've been terrified of him. The moment that a strong man is shown to be weak and the base starts to erode, there are people around him who have been desperate to get out from underneath his thumb and his power. The question is, how many of them fall into that camp? The question is, how many of them are responsible for the cruelties that Putin could possibly roll out in order to save himself from humiliation? He does not care if he survives the consequences. He's been completely won over to the idea that he is a man of history. And men who believe that they are men of history are willing to absolutely sacrifice everyone and everything. But I will say, for all the people we're going through, I got to tell you, we're going through some bourbon tonight. For everybody who keeps comparing him to Adolf Hitler, obviously the aggression and the dictatorial nature are apt. But Adolf Hitler had an ideology that everyone else had bought in around him. The Nazis believed in these esoteric myths. They had their own religion in which Adolf Hitler had been raised up to the level of a messiah. They were more than happy to die for him. They were happy to go ahead and take the territory and the wealth and the power. That's not what's happened here in Russia. Putin has used reactionary energy to build himself a base, but it has been largely based on greed and wealth. In this situation, he is not surrounded by a bunch of true believers. They know that Vladimir Putin is a criminal and a thug. There's a difference here. The question is, how many people will go along with him? Vivaldi's Four Seasons asked, it is critical that folks document what is occurring in Ukraine right now and how our government reps reacted to these events. Many will try to rewrite history to make it seem like they always supported Ukraine should Russia fail. Who's reporting on these events do you recommend we follow? For me personally, the way that I have followed events is, on one hand, Kiev Independent, I think, has been absolutely invaluable in terms of information on the ground. And when you follow them, you have to understand partly that they are reporting the news, but also undoubtedly they're carrying some, state water in terms of misinformation, disinformation, and watching that battle take place in real time has been fascinating. In terms of Ukraine, Timothy Snyder, I have to tell you, before this ever happened, my knowledge of Ukraine came in a lot of ways from him. My information on Putin came from my own research, but in terms of Ukraine, I thought Timothy Snyder and his thoughts on not just the culture and the history, but the things that are at stake here has been incredible. What I've been doing as well is I've been spending a lot of time tracking how our media and our politicians have been reacting to this. I have to tell you, and I know that, oh yeah, Chalupa is absolutely great too. Absolutely. I know this is going to be shocking to everybody, but our media is absolutely in rapture about this thing. CNN is just loving the fact that they have become the center of attention. And I don't know how everyone else has felt in the middle of all of this. This crisis has only made it more clear, more evident, and more pressing that we need more than ever a network, a straight reporting network without all the bells and the whistles and the video packages and all of that. And I have to tell you, some of the stuff that I have seen so far has been beyond disturbing. It's been awful. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Oh, Vindman's been good too. Vindman's been good. So yeah, what I'd recommend: Kiev Independent, Timothy Snyder, Chalupa, and Vindman. I think they've been really, really good. The Independent counts got suspended. Really? Man, we are going to go through Bourbon tonight. It's happening. All right. Mike CS. Will the oligarchs or the embarrassment of Russian military difficulties, ineptitude, and Russian moms be more of a force or influence for positive change, or double down towards a greater catastrophe? It's a great question. You know, I have to tell you that I think that the sanctions so far, you know, obviously this move to get out of SWIFT is important. It has to be turned to a point where there is absolutely no reason for anyone to side with Vladimir Putin. Because these oligarchs, you have to remember this, what they're doing is that they make a decision every single day. They make a decision that their fates and their pocketbooks are better spent with Vladimir Putin. That's a decision they make every single day. They make a decision to kiss the ring, to lick the boots, you know, because they're terrified of him. Already they have to be wondering. There has to be a seed of doubt over whether or not their fates and their pocketbooks are better served moving beyond Vladimir Putin. Because if they think that Vladimir Putin is going to survive this intact, if they think that Vladimir Putin is going to hold the reins after this, they'll stick with him. But I have to tell you, the courage that the Russian people are showing right now. You know, over in Ukraine, you've got people picking up automatic weapons, making Molotov cocktails, just absolutely profiles in courage. I got to tell you, another profile in courage is what's happening in Russia. The Russian people are so brave. And the fact that they have lived through this Putinist regime and still are able to find hope, and that they're able to believe that there's a better future and that they can get out from underneath this tyranny, it's incredible. We could learn so much from them. Because the entire point of a dictatorship is to eventually wear people down to the point where they just won't fight anymore. Why would you fight? I mean, that's the way things are. The fact that these protesters are still coming out, even though they're going to get arrested, even though they're going to get brutalized, maybe they'll even be disappeared. And I have to tell you right now, the more that Vladimir Putin is humiliated, the more chance there is for widespread oppression within Russia. Because one of the things that's going to happen is he's going to have to reestablish his authority. And the people who are showing up, the people who are protesting, the people who are putting their lives and their fortunes and their well-being on the line, they know that. They know that he is a cornered rat. And they know that he is going to have to crack down in some way, shape, or form to try and keep hold of the power that he has, to not let it slip, to not let it loose. They're amazing. And I got to tell you, and this is an important thing, and I want to make this really, really clear. If somehow or another we get out from this thing, if somehow or another we manage to avoid World War III, if somehow or another we manage to avoid Russia overtaking Ukraine, if somehow or another we get out from this, it's going to be the people. It's not going to be the states. It's not going to be the Western powers. It's not going to be the market. It's not going to be the neoliberal global order. It's going to be the people. That's it. The people. Michelle asked me to talk about the Belarus referendum to allow deployment of Russian nuclear weapons. They are absolutely just frothing at the possibility of getting into this war and gaining favor from Putin. They want it so bad they can taste it. And yeah, I would not be shocked. I would not be shocked if if this thing continues down the road where it's going, and if Ukraine keeps holding its own, I would not be shocked if all of a sudden we start hearing stuff about Russian nuclear arms being transported to Belarus. I wouldn't be shocked by that. That would not shock me whatsoever. But their entry into the war, the potential that they might invade Ukraine, they some of them have, but a full scale intervention here, that would be a hell of an escalation. I got to tell you that. All right, I got two questions here that are together, so I'm going to read both of them and I'll answer. Jennifer says, can you please touch on what you think China's next move might be? For all the horror and devastation Putin is inflicting, I can't shake the feeling he's just a distraction and that China has plans. Happily Anonymous, what are the implications vis-a-vis China and Taiwan and also Hong Kong? So, I'll say this. When dealing with China, there are so many things to consider. First of all, a lot of us have simply been waiting to see what they did. If they took advantage of this moment, if they had coordinated with Russia in order to go into Taiwan, that's what we're still waiting to see, is if their meeting or if in their communications they had made a decision, hey, guess what? The American order, American hegemony, the Western powers are weak and it's time to go. We haven't seen that yet. And in a way, it makes you wonder if China saw what Russia was about to do and thought of Russia, and I was about ready to say pawn, but something more than that, right? Like a more powerful chess piece, a bishop, a knight, a rook, right? The queen, whatever you want to call it. Did China understand what Russia was about to do and said, let's see what happens? This will be a situation where we'll sort of gauge what occurs. We'll see where all of the other pieces are. As Russia does this, we'll see what kind of a coalition that can come together. We'll see what sort of economic problems there are. And you have to understand that, yes, China has, its economic blood throughout the bloodstream, for sure. But between China and Russia, they're able to sort of curb the real major consequences. One of the things that China has already provided is a promise to buy energy from Russia, which has sort of inoculated. And by the way, someone here was talking about the possibility of China bailing out Russia. I don't think that that's outside the realm of possibility either. So I think with China so far, what we have seen is that it has sort of said, yeah, absolutely, we'll watch you back here, we'll cover you, good luck. I do not think at this point that we have enough evidence to believe that they made a pact of aggression. But I will tell you that China and Russia have decided that they are going to change the world order. I think this is the essence of these conversations. I think that's in a large way what's been happening here. But I have to tell you, if China moves on Taiwan here, I got to be honest with you, that's the time to go out and buy some canned goods. That is that's hard times. That's what that is. Hackatron says, I've been noticing a subtle but distinct messaging of saying Putin instead of Russia when officials are talking about the invasion. Am I crazy to think that they are trying to softly foment some kind of coup or uprising by placing the blame solely on him? As an add-on, the central bank and SWIFT sanctions are going to be devastating to the Russian people, while Putin can wait it out a while. Putin clearly doesn't care about them suffering, so this is directed at the people to pressure him and adding another front. Yes, absolutely. This is about squeezing the people. And it's about hurting Russia and destabilizing the power base that Putin has. It's about soft measures. It's about trying to make the people feel it and push back against him. Absolutely it is. While also hurting the oligarchs. The one of the big points here was squeezing the oligarchs and hitting them where it hurt in order to try and get movement behind the scenes against Putin. Yeah, what I would say, Julia said it's not just Putin and those close to him that want this. There are tons of people that want this. It just so happens that not all of them are in Russia. A large part of Putin's ideological base is spread around the world. It's this transnational authoritarian movement, which we got to talk about in a minute, what that means, where it goes, how it works, all of that stuff, because that is a much, much bigger topic. But this whole talking more about Putin versus Russia, it's a combination of things. And part of it is putting the onus on Vladimir Putin as an individual, because he did make this decision. This was his move. He's bringing everybody along with him. Now, in terms of why else they might continually point out Putin is because our media loves a figure. They love a villain. And Putin is absolutely the centerpiece in terms of a villain to be fighting. So it's a combination of things, but I think the states have pointed at Vladimir Putin in order to isolate him within the larger standing. It's Putin is invading. Putin has done this. Putin made the decision, because it's not the Russian people. The Russian people don't want this. The Russian people are so oppressed and abused. It's Putin, for sure. Now, Brian asked the $64,000 question, which is, do you think a coup is in the cards? Unfortunately, the answer is maybe. I said this on Twitter earlier today. The royal flush, to use a poker term, the most unlikely but the best possible hand that you can be dealt, is that Putin will be pushed out as he loses favor among the oligarchs, but also the Russian people. If it's a populist uprising, that's all the better. Because if the oligarchs simply get rid of him and replace him with another kleptocrat, not great. If the military leaders take over and you suddenly have a military dictator in Russia, that's a terrifying idea, because suddenly you not only have a dictator, but all of a sudden you have a military figure who has to revitalize the idea of Russian military strength, which is one of the things that leads to aggression, authoritarianism, and fascism. The best possible scenario in all of these things is that there is a grassroots movement. That's the best possible thing, that you actually have a resurgence of democracy within Russia. The next part of that best case scenario is that we suddenly look up and the Western powers and the neoliberal global order looks up and they suddenly realize, you know what? It does not pay to be in bed with these people. It does not pay to play footsie with dictators and authoritarians. And oh my God, this corruption that we have right now is an existential threat, and we have to stop it. We have to do better. We have to end this austerity. We have to end this cruelty. We need to rein in these markets, because I have to tell you, there are a whole lot of wealthy people out there right now who haven't even blinked at this invasion of Ukraine. There are wealthy people out there right now who are making so much damn money from the suffering that's happening in Ukraine right now. There are people who have bet on this working. There are people who are more than happy to make money either on the weapons or the relief or any of it. In all of this, the best case scenario is that this is a wake-up call. The worst case scenario, is obviously that Putin takes over and or uses this cruelty. But if it fails, the worst case scenario of the failure is that we end up with some sort of a revitalizing military dictator figure, and also the Western powers pat themselves on the back and believe that they saved the day and they don't have to change anything. And oh my God, isn't this order very, very strong? Which, just get ready this week for a ton of bullshit articles talking about how strong this system is and how it's warded off failure so far, and just completely just like thumbs its nose at the Ukrainian people. So do I think the coup is in the cards? Maybe. I don't know. But this could be a sea change. This could be a moment of reckoning and real change. This could be a moment of reform. This could be a moment of revitalization. And we don't know. So much of what has happened, and this is important, so much of what has happened has been quote unquote unpredictable for a lot of people because they couldn't imagine a different world. They couldn't imagine things ever possibly changing. We don't know. History surprises you constantly. And there is a possibility that this thing could be a turning point, for good or for bad. Jaded asked, very interested in the regime change idea and if this could turn the world back toward democracy and against the rise in autocracy we've seen. Maybe. If Vladimir Putin tries to do this and he is smacked back, not just by the Ukrainian people, but also loses his base of power, you could suddenly have a lot of authoritarians who have been feeling themselves over the past few years, and for good reason, because liberal democracy and liberals and neoliberals have just sort of let them run roughshod and pretended like nothing was going on. You could see a lot of them suddenly realize, man, I don't really want to take this chance. Maybe I should just sit back and just make a bunch of money and hold on to my power. That is a real possibility that this could be a stop sign for some of these people. That is a possibility. And that's right. State of the Union is on Tuesday night. So we'll see how that goes. Sean asked, what's your take on the whole Ghost of Kiev thing? I feel like this whole thing has been really strange. And yes, absolutely. It's been incredibly strange. And I want to talk about this for just a second. I think there's a lot to learn here. The Ghost of Kiev, for those who don't know, is a rumored ace jet fighter pilot who has supposedly, according to urban legend and rumors, just been knocking out Russian jets left and right. And one of the things about it is we keep getting conflicting reports. Most of them have said that this person doesn't actually exist and it's just something that people are talking about on social media. And then you'll notice that there are a lot of people who say, you know what, even if it's not real, I want to believe in it and I'm going to believe in it. And this is important in all of this. We're watching a really strange thing happen. We're watching the first real social media massive war. And I'm talking because obviously there have been other wars, there have been other invasions, there have been other cruelties. Here, what we're watching is a very, very social media driven war. We can see the battles. We have these memes coming out. And all of a sudden, the way that we're digesting this stuff, the way that we're experiencing it, it's important to take a breath every now and then and really notice what's happening. So, for instance, look at Zelensky. Zelensky has been able to more or less meme himself to a position of authority and power. You know, his videos have worked, the pictures have worked, the posturing has worked. That is what it takes now. It's putting yourself out there and knowing how to portray yourself in mass media. Meanwhile, what has happened in America with the Ukrainian people has been fascinating. Obviously, we're rooting for them. We want them to be safe. We want them to be successful. This cause célèbre for a lot of people has turned into something of a sporting event. It's like over the past couple of days, are they winning? Are they winning? How many tanks have they knocked out? How many soldiers have they knocked out? And it has more or less become shorthand for how the war is working and what it means. This is strange. This is really, really strange what we are watching. This just fetishization of the moment. I have to tell you, I was going to mention this a little bit, and I'll talk about it a little bit too. You know, I was checking out CNN to see what their coverage was like a couple days ago. And they were showing these pictures of Ukrainians grabbing automatic weapons. They were handing out automatic weapons for defending their city. And they were showing, you know, old women learning how to shoot. They were showing young people learning how to shoot, teenagers. And then they showed like a 6-year-old, maybe even a 5-year-old being handed a gun and examining it. And it was sort of framed as, isn't this a beautiful thing? And it's this bizarre moment because they shouldn't be in this situation. They shouldn't have to do this. They shouldn't be suffering through this. This was made possible because the global order accepted Vladimir Putin and gave him a seat at the table for so long and allowed his corruption to spread. And now all of a sudden, it's very much sort of a metaphor for neoliberalism, which of course says that the government shouldn't help you. You should have to help yourself. And now we're just praising these people for having to defend themselves. It's very much a market-driven neoliberal artifact that is just bizarre. And I think, and again, by the way, cheers to the people of Ukraine for their bravery and their strength and their courage. Cheers, 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 cheers. The way that we have treated it is bizarre. Meanwhile, it's a television show. You watch the way that the mainstream media is covering this, like they can't get enough explosions. They can't get enough gunfire. They can't get enough terror and refugees. This is content. It's content. That's important to note as we're paying attention to this. It's content for cable news. It's content for social media. And I know that you know this. You can go on social media right now, and there are people who are using this to increase Their numbers, their followers, their retweets, their likes, their impressions. It's bizarre. It's perverse. It's important to think about. It's important to pay attention to. What have we become? And it needs to change. These people should not be in this situation in the first place. They've been failed by their courage and their decency alone. They've been able to do what they've done. It is. The dehumanization of it all is horrifying and heartbreaking. Hear, hear. Cheers. Asif says, any indication that the current administration will take steps towards energy independence now that it's a matter of national security? Here is a great question. And I'm so glad that Asif asked this, and I'll tell you why. Of all of this, none of this situation would be occurring if we would have gone ahead and got into clean energy and energy alternatives. And the same people who are making money off of Russia's aggressions, the same people who are making money off of this war, the same people who are in league with the Republicans and the right-wing groups that are pushing fossil fuels. Those are the same people who have just absolutely kept alternative energy from taking off, from being an actual force and an actual option. So yeah. And will we see this finally as a moment to get off of oil or get energy independence? Probably not, because that's not what the market wants. It's just not. The market is in thrall to these forces. It's one of the reasons why Russia has the money and influence and power that it has. I agree, David. I agree. I can see why people want to go there and fight. I get it. I totally get it. All right, we're getting up on 60 minutes where we'll take a quick drink and then keep going. We got a whole lot of questions tonight. Oh, I hadn't seen this question. I'll answer this one, and then I've got a couple that go together. Lucky Otter says, if Putin fails, do you think the GOP's hold on America will start to lose its grip? I got to tell you, I think what would happen in this case is you would probably see an ideological moment of drift, because there is a battle within the Republican Party. I know there's a question on this list that I'll get to later to talk more about that. I think that it would loosen the situation up a little bit. I think that there would be more room for the authoritarian strain to calm down a little bit, because so much of this has to do with the transnational movement that it represents. But I don't know that it would get rid of it. The cultural and political situation that we have right now, I mean, there have been years of this thing building. I don't think it would go away. But I do think that if Putin were to lose this and possibly lose his control on power, I think that would strike a blow against the authoritarian transnational movement here. I do. I think that would strike a blow against them. I do not know how they would react. I don't know where it would move. I don't know how it would change and mutate. But I do know that Vladimir Putin is not just a major figure, but a tent pole in all of this. Maybe the biggest figure in all of this. They would, of course, still have Orban, but Orban has been scared in this entire thing. I have to tell you that if the Ukrainian invasion would have gone better, I don't think Orban would be sitting around talking about how this war needs to end. He made his own choice. You know, he's looking at his own fate. That should tell you where things are, how bad this situation is. So, yeah, I think if Putin lost this, and if he lost his grip on power, I do think the GOP would find itself in a bizarre ideological crisis. I mean, it's already bizarre, but it would be different. It would take on different parameters. It would have a different context, is what I'd say. All right, 1 hour. We're going to finish our drink and then move on. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Down with tyrants. Down with tyrants. As always, it's good to do these things, see people, talk, figure this stuff out together, especially so at this moment. Especially so at this moment. You know, we can be fearful, we can be anxious, we can be terrified, but we can do it together. And we've been on this journey for a while, haven't we? We've watched this thing grow and mutate and change. And we knew bad stuff was coming, and here we are. All right, we got it's larceny. We're drinking larceny tonight. We need to get a sponsor for Bourbon Talk, is what we need to do. We need to get a bourbon supplier that wants to sponsor Bourbon Talk. That's what we do. We need that. 2 questions together along the same lines. Tim says, I listened to your audio from a collapsing state thing on your Substack and thought it was pretty fascinating. What do you make of leftists saying the U.S. is an imperial power and has no right to criticize anything anyone does? Alaric says, most people carrying water for Putin come from the right, but what do you make of leftists doing the same, like DSA and Katie Halper, etc.? They seem to be more about undermining support for Ukraine rather than praising Putin. Okay, so a bunch of stuff to talk about here. First of all, if you haven't heard it already, over on my Substack, jaredyatessexton.substack.com, I've started a new audio sort of feature for those listening right now to this audio version of this Bourbon Talk over there. Cheers. I'll go ahead and drink that. Cheers. Thank you for your support. I'm going to use that for updates and just some places, a place to get into. I don't know. I like talking about this stuff. I think talking about it sometimes is a lot better than working with 280 characters at a time. So I'll be posting stuff over there that gets deeper into these issues and explains things a little bit more. I think verbally I can do some stuff there. What I was talking about is how the left has become so entrenched in being anti-liberal. And for those, obviously, most of you know this, but just to go ahead and state it for the record, there is a difference between the left and liberals. Liberals, of course, can be, you can really go ahead and put liberals either center left, center right. The very term liberal is a lot of different things. But the left has become, particularly in online circles and in these publications, they've become so anti-liberal. The split, of course, happened a long, long time ago, particularly as the Democratic Party moved more towards the center and towards neoliberalism. But recently, particularly, we've seen this as, Bernie Sanders ran for the nomination in 2016 and 2020, and the Democratic Party, of course, dealt with him the way that they did. So you've seen a fracture, particularly between the left and liberals, that has taken shape in social media. And so as a result, the left, as they signaled to one another, particularly the socialist left on social media, they signaled to each other by making fun of any concerns that liberals might have, including their criticisms of Donald Trump, their criticisms of Russia. And lately, it has been focused on this idea that Russia was ever going to invade Ukraine. And can you believe that? Oh my God, it's so ridiculous. Who would ever listen to American intelligence? Here, it just so happened that American intelligence was right. They told you what they knew, and they did it to try and curb invasion. The left really kind of just did a lot to just sort of posture. I think a lot of this has to do with social media. I think it has to do with performing a role and being part of an in-group and an out-group. I, for instance, am a leftist. But because I think that Donald Trump is dangerous, and because I think there's an authoritarian movement, it's funny to some leftists. I am sort of kicked around for that because they traffic in irony. And the problem is that leftism has struggled, of course, since the Soviet Union has fallen and neoliberalism has taken over. And so as a result, there's sort of a almost a nihilism that has set in, a pessimism that anything could possibly ever change. And as a result, a lot of leftists, in order to behave on the social media and sort of signal who they are, a lot of leftists hide behind irony. Well, I don't really care. Why would I care? It's a very nihilistic sort of an idea. Now, in terms of why they're going after this idea of interventionism, or why they're not like criticizing Putin and they're actually criticizing Ukraine or the United States, is because this is a really complicated issue. Are there neo-Nazis in Ukraine? Absolutely, there are. There are neo-Nazis in pretty much every country around the world. Like, that's just true. And yeah, there are some in Ukraine, but that doesn't mean that they deserve to be invaded any more than any other sovereign nation deserves to be invaded. It's dumb. And simply answering, like, what should we do about this invasion by saying, United States invaded Iraq in 2003? Absolutely, we did. But I reject your dichotomy. Simply because the United States invaded Iraq in 2003 does not mean that Russia can invade Ukraine in 2022. I think both things are wrong. That's the problem here, is it becomes about trench warfare between different identities. It's not even about the actual ideology. It becomes about performance. It becomes about performing on a social media venue and pretending to be one thing, even if you might know different. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And people need to get on board and understand that authoritarianism is rising and Ukraine is absolutely being abused. Period. It is. You can say that America has problems and that America has been on the wrong side of issues, but that doesn't mean that suddenly Vladimir Putin has a blank check to invade any country that he wants to. That's disgusting. Earl says, my position on Ukraine is similar to Eugene Debs. By the way, here's to Eugene Debs, the pride of Terre Haute, Indiana. His house still stands on the campus of Indiana State University. One of the greatest Americans to ever live. Eugene Debs. Cheers. My position on Ukraine is similar to Eugene Debs regarding working people having no stake in imperialist war. We have to counter the pro-war wing that wants a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I'll say this about the no-fly zone in this case. A no-fly zone might work, but it could also lead into a larger scenario, an escalation. Now, in terms of working people having no stake in imperial war, absolutely. There are poor people who are dying on both sides of this conflict. I think one of the actually most important things that we have seen in terms of social media or things going viral from this war has been this video of a young Russian soldier crying, being surrounded by Ukrainians who are talking to him and telling him how wrong he was to invade the country. And he's crying because he's a young man. He's a young boy. He shouldn't be there. He's not there for his own sake. There's nothing for him to gain. And I have to tell you, and this is just a feeling, and I'll be honest with you, I don't have any statistics to back this up. I don't have an article. I don't have anything. But I'm telling you right now that this is my feeling. I think that Russian failure up to this point has been a combination of two things. One, the bravery of the Ukrainian people, the fierceness in which they are fighting this thing. I think that that is first and foremost what has kept the Russian aggression at bay. But I'll tell you what I think number two is. I think number two is that the Russian military doesn't believe in this. And that doesn't mean that there aren't members of the military who are killing people, because obviously hundreds of people have died. I think that there are a lot of people who have been conscripted into this. I think there have been a lot of people who have been given orders to go in and do these things, and they have been given no reason to believe in it. They know this is bullshit. And so I think that there are a lot of members of the Russian military who have no desire whatsoever to kill these people and to oppress these people. I think that what you're watching with Russia, the Russian military, is you're seeing a fighting force that doesn't want to fight. And I think that those two things are what have led to this situation. And I think that's telling. And I wish so badly. And by the way, I mean, how many videos have you seen in which Ukrainians have, just gotten in their faces? How many of them have you seen where they're being berated by Ukraine people and they're being mocked, and they take it? They don't kill the people. They don't run them over in their tanks. Why? Because they're not interested in this. They have no reason to do this. Russian troops should turn around. They should haul ass back to Russia, back to their own border. They should refuse to fight, and they should tell people, we're done. We're not going to serve Vladimir Putin anymore. We're not going to line his pockets. We're not going to give him more territory. I turn around, go home, knock it down. Knock it down. Because I have to tell you what history tells us. When there are revolutions, when there's change, what happens is that the military and the police, they say no. Go home. Knock this shit out. Knock Putin off. Get done with it. Chris C., two-part question. Do you think educating students as to the existence of old fifth columns and making comparisons to the new one would be productive? And did you find any good sources showing Americans supporting Hitler and fascists in your research that could be used? Number one, yeah, absolutely. We have to be taught real history. We have to understand that fascism took place everywhere. I was just working on the book today on sections about how it took hold in America, Britain, France, Spain. This was not just a phenomenon that took place in Germany and Italy. No matter how many movies want to tell you that, how much, oh man, my computer's getting ready to die. Hold on, let me put my power back on. I had my power guy fall out. We don't want to do that. That's a first for Bourbon Talk. That's never happened before. I didn't realize that my power cord had fallen out. Here we are. We're back. First time for everything, right? So the old fifth columns. Here in the United States, they absolutely wanted Germany to win the war and for America to join Germany. In France, I mean, they actively joined Germany once Paris got overthrown with Vichy. In Spain, they absolutely worked with those people. In this case, no, we need to learn about that for our own safety. You want to talk about quote unquote CRT. You want to talk about all of these efforts to change our history. We have every reason to learn history in order to protect ourselves and have innovation. This is a big problem. The more that we have reactionary control over these things, the less knowledge that actually gets out. But yeah, there are examples of this pretty much everywhere. Fascism was not a phenomenon in Germany or Italy. It is a human phenomenon. It can spring up anywhere. Jay says, how are these new developments going to require changes to be made to your book? That is a great question. I'm working on it right now. I'm finishing the book and revisions as this thing plays out. The book doesn't come out until October, which means that I have to be able to continue to change this and update it. Right now, it's mentioned a couple of times, but the main mention of it comes like, I want to say like 3 paragraphs before the very, very last sentence of the book. It's an ongoing situation, but I mean, it's simply part of the larger thesis, which is that so-called Western civilization has arrived at a crossroads, and there is a crisis that has arrived and is threatening to spill over. So there's a lot. It's a lot that is having to be done as I finish this book. Kirsten, think the continuing Ukrainian war will put a damper on the truck convoy bid to block Biden's State of the Union? I have no idea if this convoy is going to come together, but I will say, and this is important, that we still haven't seen the right wing in America do more than support this rhetorically. And we've seen that a lot. We've seen, of course, Tucker Carlson pushing this stuff. We've seen Donald Trump in his unbelievable, by the way, that somehow or another, Donald Trump continues to degrade in terms of intelligence. It is shocking. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but it's just like every time he talks, and maybe in part it's that the callous of hearing him talk every day has sort of fallen to the wayside. But oh my God. But so far, the support has been rhetorical. And I have to feel that if this thing escalates, and if Vladimir Putin holds on to power and escalates this entire situation, I have to feel like the right wing at some moment here is going to rise up in some type of subterfuge. I don't know that this truck convoy is going to take off. I do know that there are a lot of wealthy right-wing donors who made it happen in Canada. And I do think that that was a test run to see how they can interfere in the business of state and also cut off a capital. I think that's part of this larger movement. So I don't think it's going to block the State of the Union. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, anything's on the table at this point. But the right wing has to start. You'd think at some point they're going to throw a wrench in the gears here. Dan Arcus, just interested in hearing your thoughts on the growing dissonance of American authoritarians and their supporters seeming to support Ukraine. The pro-Putin position seems to have shrunk dramatically since the invasion. I think right now, what the American right wing, particularly the politicians and the commentariat, I think what they're doing right now is sort of hedging their bets. They want to be on the side of a winner. You know, you have somebody like Tucker Carlson who just absolutely jumped in with both feet to push this stuff. And I think that's because he considers himself the vanguard of authoritarianism, right-wing reactionary authoritarianism in America. I think they're hedging their bets. And I think the trouble that he has been having taking over Ukraine has given some of them pause. And again, I don't think that means they're going to go away. I don't think it's going to change their stripe. But I do think that if that trouble continues, I think they've got some hard decisions to make in terms of what type of a horse to back, right? But yeah, it's shifted a little bit. I mean, it's been strange. You've even seen the rhetoric change with somebody like an Alex Jones, who's been all over the place with this thing. On one hand, it was a good idea for Putin to invade, and it was his right. The next moment, it was like, oh my God, this is tyranny. And I think part of the reason is because nobody expected this war not just to be so difficult, but they didn't expect what social media was going to feel like. They did not expect for this to be a cell phone war for videos and pictures to continually keep track of this thing and to dominate the narrative, because the narrative up to this point has been by far from the point of view of the Ukrainian people. It's been an incredible coup in that regard in terms of information warfare. And I don't think Russia even considered that for a moment. I mean, obviously they have bots and trolls and all these people on social media, but I don't think that they understood exactly how much the narrative was going to revolve around these videos and these pictures. I think that was underestimated. I mean, we're watching a novel thing. We're watching like what modern warfare is going to be like. And I think that Russia has lost that information war so far. And not just in a small way, in a massive, massive, overwhelming way. Karen, hi, Canadian here. Cheers. Oh, real fast. R. Jones says they didn't have a clue about Ukraine. That's what happens with powers. They completely operate from a point of hubris. These powerful nation states, they believe their own bullshit. They believe their own propaganda. They believe that they are actually chosen and better than all of these other people. I mean, the United States did it. It's one of the reasons why the Forever Wars went the way that they did. But they totally believe, like, we're more powerful, we're richer, all of that. And obviously, we're not even going to suffer a problem. We could never be defeated. Oh my God. It's absolute hubris. Time and time and time again. All right, Karen, Canadian here. What do you make of GOP nut jobs talking about Canadians needing to be liberated from a tyrant? I think that's a talking point. I think it is just an absolute absurdity. But, you know, it's part of this idea that liberal democracy has led to liberal tyranny, which has its roots in libertarian ideology and Hayek and all of that bullshit. But it's about anti-neoliberals believing that neoliberalism is fascism, when that's not the case. Neoliberalism partners with fascism. Neoliberalism partners with authoritarianism. But my God, is that absurd? The idea that Canada is now a tyrannical empire. That's just, you know what it is? When you use a technical term, that's silly. That's what that is. That's silly. But it's part of this ongoing attack. I mean, this transnational authoritarian movement, that's what they're about. They're just trying to undermine, the entire reality of the situation and go after liberal democracy. I mean, that's their entire plan. And Putin's part of that thing. That's what it is. Silliness. Mindy, Marjorie Taylor Greene in a Nazi rally, a little on the nose. Yeah, so for those who haven't followed this, AFPAC and Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a literal Nazi. Lily, I'll answer that in just a second. For those who don't know Nick Fuentes, and congratulations if you don't, a really, really untalented Nazi. He isn't even smart enough to understand crypto-fascism. And for those who don't know, crypto-fascists are people who are fascists. They hold fascist beliefs, but they know that they probably shouldn't be advertising that. So they deal in like dog whistles, They snake between the lines, and they have plausible deniability of the actual fact that they're fascist. Nick Fuentes is a Nazi. He is a crypto-fascist Nazi. And his whole shtick is to say things like, "Oh, the Holocaust didn't happen. Oh my God, did I say that out loud?" And Hitler was a great leader. Oh my God, I shouldn't have said that out loud. That's his whole thing. It's really stupid, is what it is. And Marjorie Taylor Greene either knew and didn't care, or is so undisciplined and stupid and unorganized that she didn't even know. I actually think there's a possibility of both things in this situation. But I want to point out something, and this is something to keep in mind. Steve King of Iowa was basically booted out of the Republican Party because he was a little bit too chummy with white nationalism. she's not going to suffer any consequences from this that I really truly believe. She was able to do this, and if she understood who Fuentes was, and there's a real possibility that she did, I can't believe she didn't have somebody on her staff who didn't tell her that he was a crypto fascist. I don't think she's going to suffer from that, because Nazism and fascism have been mainstreamed within the Republican Party. The Overton window has been moved. This is totally fine within the GOP. That's what to take from this. That's exactly what to take from it. Real fast, I had a question from Lily Moon, who asked if I was concerned about cyber attacks. Absolutely, I am. Yeah. Yep. I am. One of the things that's happened here is that Russia has probably infected God knows how many systems with applications and weapons that are ready to go off if they're ready to do it. And if Vladimir Putin gets desperate enough, things could get really weird and really hairy. And I would bet on that happening before any type of a nuclear volley occurs. It would be, it could get weird. It could get really, really weird. And this is built up for years. But in a way, a cyber war between the United States and Russia would almost be its own mutually assured destruction, because both of them are ready to go. Both of them are ready to inflict incredible digital damage on one another. There's no other way to put that. Okay, last question here was from Bagam. Please say more about this schism in the GOP. I'm not feeling it that way personally. My sense is that they are a majority of open Putin Nazis and a smaller group of homegrown oligarchs who reckon they will be fine anyway. I think that is somewhat accurate. I think a lot of what the schism represents is not totally ideology, but it's more about dominance within the party going forward. So, like, for instance, I think someone like a Mitch McConnell, I think Mitch McConnell would be more than happy for some sort of a theocratic, authoritarian state. I don't think he would be terrified by that idea. I actually think that McConnell would be more comfortable in that, and the things that he's done have made that more possible. In terms of what this new movement is with national conservatism, they are ideologically opposed to what traditional Republicans have created with the conservative neoliberalism. They are battling over control of the Republican Party, over what should be the orthodoxy. We have a few of these. We have a few of these people who, you have your Mitt Romneys, you have your Collins, Murkowski, these people who are considered to sort of be the quote unquote reasonable Republicans. Those are neoliberals. That's what they are. That's what they represent. When it comes to this new batch, it's actually a new generation. There are ideological divides, but there are also generational divides. And as they sort of jockey for control of the Republican Party, you're going to see more and more opportunities of this sort of group trying to just take over in totality and basically drive where the party will go and what it will do going forward and what it stands for. It's a quiet schism. And if you talk to people behind the scenes, they totally admit, off the record, in background, that it's happening. They try really, really hard to pretend like it's not happening out in public, because the Republican Party, first and foremost, is about never stepping outside of the party. It's about this, disciplining and working with one another. But there is a schism. And who wins out at this point? It's very obviously going to be the national conservatives, particularly how the game board is set up at this moment. That being said, this Putin situation, this Russian situation, we're not sure. We're not sure how that's going to play out, what's going to happen with it. But there is currently a battle within the Republican Party. All right. We've reached the end of our questions. I want to thank you for being here. On Tuesday, a new episode of the Muckrake Podcast will come out. Nick is out for Tuesday, so it's going to be me. I hope that that's okay with everybody. I hope you're not terrified to spend about an hour with me alone as Nick enjoys himself. I'll post this as audio over on my Substack, which is jaredyatessexton.substack.com. That way, if you want to walk around, listen to it, give it to other people, it's more than fun. I just want to say thank you. Again, this has been so hard and so much. As I've told people for a long, long time, something like this was brewing. Of course it was brewing. And capitalism wants it to brew. It loves these situations. People are having an unbelievable, great time making money off of this. But I appreciate you. I appreciate you being with me throughout all of this. It has been bizarre being in the middle of it, talking about it, learning about it, diagnosing it. It's been really, really bizarre. And it would have been really lonely and really tiring and really frightening if I didn't have people being kind and supportive. So I thank you so much. One last cheers to you, to us making our way through this, to the Ukrainian people persevering, and for their suffering to come to an end, and for Vladimir Putin to get his. Fuck you, buddy. All right, everybody. Talk soon.